I gave people all the stuff they really needed. Social security checks, utility bills, TV guide.
I want a TV guidance counselor. TV guidance counselor. Staying up to watch all night, and everything's gonna be alright with my TV guidance counselor.
Hey everybody, welcome to TV Guidance Counselor. I, as always, am Ken Reed, your TV Guidance Counselor, and this is the show where each and every week we talk about classic television, usually using TV guides from my personal collection as the inspiration for our conversation. Again, I hate the rhyming. If you have a better way to say that, let me know. You can email me at tvguidancecounselor@gmail.com or ken@icanread.com or become a patron. Little as $1 a month, you can message me on there. Little as $5 a month, you get a PDF of every week that we have a TV guide. This week we don't, because I didn't need it, frankly. My guest this week is the director-producer, Michael Pressman. What a good dude. This guy has directed so many things. Look at his IMDb. It's nuts in the best possible way. Dr. Detroit, directed Ninja Turtles 2 Secret of the Ooze, but then tons and tons of television, episodic television made for TV movies, which is enough to make for a fascinating a fascinating episode. But his father was also a director in the early days of television. We're talking the 40s, early 50s, in New York, and was blacklisted during the communist craze that was going on. But so he's fascinating conversation. You'll hear it all here. Incidentally, I've been looking through my old TV guides from the early 50s to try and find some of the listings for Michael's dad's shows. So I haven't found any yet, but if you guys are, I assume if anyone has old TV guides, it's my listeners. He's looking for listings for early 50s. There was a show he did, Cosmopolitan Theater. And then in the 60s, he did a Festival of the Performing Arts. It's probably 62, 63. There were 3 one-man shows. There was Zero Mostel, Robert Morley, and Jason Robards. I think there's Al Hirschfeld drawings. He also did a thing called SO Repertory Theater in 64, 65. If you find any of those, let me know. I'm looking through as I look through those years, and I'm scanning them so I can send to Michael. But throw them in a scanner, take a picture. It will be much appreciated. I know Michael will appreciate that. Anyway, I appreciate you listening. And I think you're going to appreciate listening because it's a fun episode. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of TV Guidance Counselor with my guest, Michael Pressman.
TV is my friend, and it has been always there for me in time of need.
Michael Pressman, how are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm post-COVID.
Oh, did you just have it?
First time my wife and I got it, and we had a lot of time to watch lots of movies and miniseries and television. So
yeah, I assume you're like me, where you have just a stack of things you need to get to.
Endless. I'm not there yet. I mean, I'm halfway through.
Any gems? Anything that popped out that you were surprised?
A couple of gems. Well, of course, for me this year, the gem has been The Bear, and we're also addicted to Slow Horses. Have you seen it?
I have not seen Slow Horses.
Oh my God, Gary Oldman's amazing.
Oh, okay.
And of course, The Crown. We're still followers of The Crown.
So a little Anglophile stuff going in there between Oldman and The Crown.
So though, if you ask me, like, what's my favorite miniseries in this whole group of the last decade or whatever, I'm going to say the French Call My Agent. I loved that series. Loved it.
So comedy stuff. I mean, The Bear's a dark comedy and Call My Agent's comedy, but like most of the stuff that you've done tends to be on the sort of drama side.
Well, that's a good point. I don't know how that happened. I mean, because I started in feature films really with comedy. I mean, I did a couple of dramas, but the Roger Corman movie that I did when I was 25 and got started, I mean, it was kind of a comedy sexploitation. I mean, his emphasis was comedy. And then, of course, the Bad News Bears sequel was a comedy. And then I worked with the 2 great comedian stars, Richard Pryor and Dan Aykroyd. So I had a whole following. And then when I got into television, even though Picket Fences was a serious drama, it had a lot of quirky humor. But, I think the reason I gravitated towards drama in television is I find it very hard to know when something is working in comedy in television because you don't play it for an audience.
True. True.
I might know it's funny, but one of the biggest problems is when you start dealing with executives who think it's not funny and you're
They're
going,
never funny.
it's like, you can't look at them and go, let's screen this. The great story I heard was the executives at Warner Brothers screened Blazing Saddles, and they were horrified. I don't know if you've heard this story.
No, I haven't, but I'm not surprised.
Not a single laugh, mouths open, horrified. And Mel Brooks, he talked about this in a thing I heard, a lecture, and he said he thought his career was over, and the producer, Michael Hertzberg, I think it was, or there was another Michael Gruskoff, one of the Michaels said, "Let's sneak it this weekend in Westwood, California," and they snuck it, and the audience went nuts. It opened to tremendous box office, and then he got a wonderful letter from Warner Brothers saying, "We love your movie," and he went, "They don't love my movie, they box office." He
They
said,
love the money my movie made.
yeah, they didn't, they hated my movie, but
I recently had Alan Arkish on, and Alan was saying that whenever an executive says, here's something funny, it's never funny.
yeah, yeah,
And
I wouldn't disagree with Alan Arkish, and we both came from that Roger Corman school.
right, I was going to say, he said that, and you've probably heard this around New World, Roger will let you make any movie you want to make as long as you make the movie he wants.
Yeah. Well, Alan, Joe Dante, Jonathan Kaplan, that whole crowd, they were closer. I was a little bit removed. I made a independent financed movie that Roger picked up, but I knew everybody, and they actually were all very helpful in recommending me. But I had the real luxury of not having him that involved. He approved the script and the casting and the cut, but it wasn't like he was looking over my shoulder. So I was sort of left to my own devices.
Yeah, it's a rare, from everyone I know who worked with him, he often looked over his shoulder, so you did look out.
Right. Though my influence at that time was actually my 3 years at Cal Arts Film School. I was there the first year it was started in 1970. I can't believe these dates. But my teacher was a famous, brilliant British director named Alexander McKendrick, who had done Man in the White Suit and The Lady Killers, which is probably one of the greatest comedies of all time.
Alec Guinness, right?
Alec Guinness. And then another drama, Sweet Smell of Success, which is another masterpiece. So he really, we studied comedy with him, and I really saw things through his lens. And, it was a great, and then I'm forgetting, I mean, in addition to going into drama on television, I came back and did the silliest comedy of all for me, which was the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles
Yes.
Secret of the Ooze.
I'm glad you see it as a comedy.
Well, I don't know how you can see it any other way, but we purposely went for, like, thematically, the Marx Brothers or the Three Stooges.
That makes sense.
So and I was using everything I knew from film school, which was in the simplest, without, this is one sentence after 3 years of study, but it's worth it. And that is, the comedy plays in the master shot. And I was always shooting, group shots, and I would do, it was very hard to do, but I wasn't doing lots of coverage. I was doing lots of oneers with everybody moving in the same frame. And then close-ups would be a punctuation if necessary.
Was the fact that was one of the few kind of special effects heavy movies, I think, in your filmography, did that kind of make it more difficult to do that sort of coverage or to get the comedy, because stuff's got to work?
Well, actually, we were right before the special effects. Everything was done live on the set. So we had puppeteers, we had actors in suits with electronic faces and heads. So it was cumbersome, and it took 75 shooting days with 2 units.
Wow.
So it was not easy, and sometimes you'd get 3 shots a day. Um, but it was a independent, non-union film shot in North Carolina, still for about $40 million now.
Was that a Golden Harvest and New Line co-production?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Golden Harvest super involved? Did you deal with them much? I'm kind of
Yes, I
fascinated by
did. I
them.
did a lot. In fact, there was a gentleman named David Chan who I
Oh
think
yeah.
I don't know where he is today, but we got along fabulously, and he was a great supporter.
I just finished side note, I just finished a very good book by Grady Hendrix about the history of kung fu, like martial arts in America, focusing on the films and stuff. And he has a very interesting story about Golden Harvest and the triads.
Oh, okay, okay, I'll have to find it. Well, the one that was really the superstar of that movie was, and I'm not recalling his last name, but Pat, who recently died, who was the karate expert. He also did Karate Kid and designed all the action in Karate Kid.
Okay, yeah.
And his name is escaping me, but I remember Pat. And
He was the fight choreographer for
fight
that.
choreographer. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's so. Well, one more question about Secret of the Ooze, and then
Please.
I want to go back to sort of your origin story. But did you also have to direct the Vanilla Ice video?
Yes.
Oh, okay. How was that?
Um, Nothing out of the ordinary than what you would expect. I mean, he was there for 3 days, which was remarkable, and he had a team, and he did it again and again, and he was cool, and I can't tell you if I remember any of my conversations with him. I don't know if I had them, but it was a little bit here and there, and that was pretty much it. I mean, I think they were there to have a good time.
Yeah, because that was that the only music video you ever did. It was kind of an adjunct to the movie.
Yeah, yeah, that's the only, well, yes, that I can think of. Oh, Dr. Detroit, we had a whole dance sequence.
Yes, Devo is
Yeah,
prominently featured on the
yeah,
soundtrack of that.
yeah.
So many things I want to talk to you about because you've worked on so many things. But let's go back to you're sort of a legacy director because your dad was
Right. Well, my
also
father, my father started, first of all, he was born in Russia, actually in southern Georgia, came to America when he was 9 years old without speaking English and learned the language, and was being trained to be a concert violinist because he came from a musical family, and he broke his wrist in high school and somehow stopped playing the violin, which was a blessing in disguise because he went into acting, went to the neighborhood playhouse, became an assistant to the famous Sanford Meisner, and taught acting at the neighborhood playhouse, and then went into directing. And then this was all during the 1930s. He was very political and joined the Communist Party, like every other artist of the day.
right, and this is in Manhattan, right?
Yeah, who was
Yeah, I mean it's yeah.
concerned about civil rights and social medicine and social security and unions and that kind of stuff. Anyway, and then got very, very busy in the late 30s, but World War II came, and he was drafted, and he was a sergeant in World War II, came back a Purple Heart warrior, was wounded, and then found himself being invited to the Actors Studio the first year, the original members, and they developed a live television half-hour drama series that was live that is lost. I think I found one episode. And
What was it called?
the one that it's the last season, and it's called Cosmopolitan Theater of the Air, and it's the Lottery, it's called.
Oh, the Shirley Jackson story.
No, no,
Okay.
this is something completely different. But and then the one show that he did of all those seasons, and I've never seen it, was the one that became the most famous was directing a Molnar play called The Swan that starred Grace Kelly. And Grace Kelly went on to do the movie. So they got it from the television show. Um, what was interesting was he rotated as directors on these live TV shows with Martin Ritt and Daniel Mann, who both went to Hollywood. Marty Ritt was blacklisted a little, but my father, because he stayed in New York and worked in live television, um, the blacklist after hitting Hollywood, and it's another subject for another day about what happened with Hollywood in the studios in the late 1940s. But by early 1950s, they had started to infiltrate television because it dealt with sponsors, and there were
Hmm.
people who owned supermarkets. A specific man named Mr. Johnson, who made a thing called the Red Channels, a book that put names of anybody who was a left-wing member or some connection with the Communist Party. My father was no longer a member of the Communist Party. In fact, he fought for America to defeat fascism. So it was a double whammy to all of a sudden find his name on a list and fired from CBS. And he did not work in television for 12 years. Missed the whole heyday of live TV, and because he was doing sort of like the pioneer work. I mean, he did maybe 100 episodes, but they were never recorded or whatever. And then went back into acting teaching, and that's when he started the acting school at Boston University. And I remember my parents going up to Boston 3 days a week when I was a kid. Grandparents took care of us. And then broke the blacklist in the 1960s and started directing in New York, The Defenders, which was a great show, and another early series called NYPD, not NYPD Blue,
Yes.
NYPD, with Jack Warden and Frank Converse. And I will say he did one amazing episode that starred Al Pacino and Jill Clayburgh in that half-hour show.
Wow.
Anyway, so and then he stayed in New York. They never went to My parents never moved to LA, and he ended up doing a soap opera for 25 years and worked until he was 85. And so it's
So
pretty
it's
remarkable.
it's I always put this context in for listeners too. Like, New York was TV until the 60s, really. It was LA was movies, and
Yes.
New York was TV, and it was very separate and very different. And then you started to get that shift in the mid 60s, and by the time Carson moved to LA, it was like New York was just a couple of game shows and soaps.
And someone said to me the other day, New York and LA, you could call the both, but it's long distance. You don't have
Yes,
long distance anymore. You know,
right.
for all I know, I could be in Hong Kong and you could be in LA.
Yeah,
It's gone, that sense of distance. What did happen in LA, and it was in the 50s, and it grew and stayed, was the studios realized very quickly they better make TV. So hence the hundreds of westerns and the
hmm,
western streets at the back lot. And this is where the connection to my father became so kind of poignant, which is when he broke the blacklist. We went, my brother and I, to Los Angeles when I was 14. My brother was 12. It was 1964. And we visited all these sets and studios because my father knew all these people from the live television days.
of course.
So we went and visited Bonanza because Lauren Green was a student, an acting student of my father's from the 30s. So we're going, Ben Cartwright? I mean, it
Yeah,
kind
this is the
of,
biggest show on TV, and you're
yes.
14 years old. Like, that's the
I mean, if you know Ben Cartwright, and then you know the rest of the gang, Jesus. And also, it was like for us, and for me especially in the early years, I've been writing about this. I felt like I went inside the TV set.
yeah.
We walked on to the set of the Munsters. I mean,
Oh,
there was
so
Fred Gwynn from the Munsters, and there was an actor my father knew and came over and introduced us to everybody, and we were having a kind of out of body experiences. Man from Uncle, Dr. Kildare. I mean, we went on all these sets in addition to movie sets, but that was crazy. So
That's
in some
insane.
respects, that was I had an East Coast New York sensibility relationship to Hollywood.
Yeah. It seems 1,000 miles away, or thousands of miles away. Totally different world. The stuff they're shooting in New York, it feels very New Yorky, but it tends to be stuff like What's My Line or Jack Parr or Ed Sullivan.
Or the television was Naked City,
Right.
East Side, West Side, The Defenders. I mean, shows.
Car 54.
Car 54, you can't forget that. One of the classics. One of my favorite all-time shows.
Mine too.
Yeah, a great one. Sergeant Bilko. Was Sergeant Bilko New York or yes?
Sergeant, yes, it was, because Phil Silvers lived there forever because he was still doing Broadway shows. Yeah, so it was, Nat Heineken was a New York guy.
So that was a whole New York sensibility, and you could really, if you look at it, you can't define it, but it's clearly not like the Hollywood television.
Yeah.
It had a quick, sharp. I mean, the Honeymooners. Was that New York or was that?
It was, yeah. Until Jackie Gleason made them build a studio in Florida
Well,
because he wanted to live there. So it was New York until he decided it was Florida.
okay, but that became the Jackie Gleason show, right? Because
Yeah, The Honeymooners was a sketch on. Yeah.
Yeah. Honeymooners actually ended up being only one season or something.
Yeah. Yeah. But then later sketches, I remember in the 80s and 90s, they had like the color Honeymooners, and it was like
Yes, that
the
was
60s. Yeah, those were.
But then, and we'll sort of get into early TV a little. I mean, the shocker today is that I Love Lucy was being viewed in real time by 50 million people.
Yeah.
Was the number.
Yeah.
And today, if you're lucky, if you get 2 million tuning in.
And that's the number one show on TV if you get two.
Yeah. I mean, Picket Fences, which was the first series I was involved in after having made television movies and feature films, and having the great good fortune of meeting and working with, for 10 years, David Kelly. And Picket Fences was his first series. We were getting a 10 rating or something like that, and 10 million people. And back then, 25 years ago, we were not a hit with 10 million. Today, we number one.
It was a constant like, save this show. It's a great quality show. It's not getting enough. And it's like 10 million people are watching it.
Right. Absolutely.
Which is nuts.
4 years. That's all we did. And that's the other thing that's happened. And I think this happened as a result of 9/11, which is all of a sudden television really became comfort food.
Sure.
And people wanted to watch what they knew. And shows that would last 4 years or 5 years were now lasting 8 years and 9 years. And now dramas are expected to go 12, 14, 15. And I've been so fortunate to have directed, 18 episodes of Law and Order SVU. It's in its 25th season.
Which is crazy. Which is crazy.
And one of the reasons it's working and is in its 25th season is Mariska Hargitay has 100% full commitment. And therefore, she's not bored or tired.
Yeah.
She has an energy, and and it comes from deep within, and it comes in from some deep commitment to the subject matter, which she's created her own foundation to deal with rape victims and et cetera. So that's just a unique, remarkable thing. But not far behind it, you've got Grey's Anatomy. Is Grey's Anatomy at year 20 or 18?
Something like that. Yeah, those shows have basically sort of picked up the soap opera model once the soaps kind of more or less petered out. But those shows have sort of been like, it's almost like where the Roger Corman movies from the 70s, their style and topics became blockbuster movies in the 80s and 90s.
Yes.
It's like the soap operas of up to the 80s are now the primetime shows.
That's correct. At least the ones that are living in the 18 and 20 years.
Right.
I mean, Grey's Anatomy is a soap opera.
Right.
And the one thing about Law and Order SVU is it's still living as a procedural.
Yeah.
So Dick Wolf has got the monopoly on procedurals. I think Chicago Fire is 13 years and PD is 11 years. And then I worked for 2 years on Chicago Med as an executive producer. That was seasons 5 and 6. And now it's in season 9. I go there in 2 weeks to direct an episode. So it's still alive and well.
But it's funny. So you mentioned Jet was directing stuff in 1949, which incidentally, you might not be able to see it behind me, but there's a TV back here from 1949. It's around, it's got a porthole. It's called the old washing machine TV.
Oh,
But
I see a lot of TVs. I don't see that one.
yeah, it's let's see if you can see it there. It's this here.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it costs
Dumont TV or no?
It is, and it cost $695 in 1949.
No. Is that how much it cost?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's not even a yeah, that's then. Which context-wise, a lot of people are shocked to know there was TV in the 40s. I mean, there was TV in the late 30s, but it was a real luxury item. And
Luxury item, and also it was kind of like off-Broadway theater. I mean,
Yes.
maybe 200,000 people would watch the live dramas without commercials, and it would be, a Philco Playhouse, so it would be a Philco commercial or, anyway, so that, it was a novelty. And then it grew into the 50s where you had Playhouse 90 and Studio One and all those, somewhat star-driven dramas.
because the 12 years that your dad was away from it was like
The golden.
200 years of evolution all of a sudden from that era where it's sort of a niche, little highbrow, kind of more upper class financially or have a TV to now it's for the masses.
Correct.
And
And
that must have been a shock to him.
it wasn't a shock as it was more a devastation because I do remember not so much in the 50s because I think by the time we were 7 and 8 we were hooked on soupy sales. Walking into the TV room while we're watching and he goes, "Oh, there's Richard Boone."
Right.
He knew all these people and couldn't get work, and that was the hard part.
So did you know that you wanted to go into that line of business then, or was that like a later decision in life?
I was living and breathing it in a way that was not defined. I knew I was I went to I went to a little acting group and I was able to act in plays and I went to Carnegie Mellon in theater because I also loved the theater. But what really happened to me was I fell in love really with the movies. I can't deny that I was a TV kid, but the world of the movies, whether it was French films like Truffaut or Fellini, Italian, or great movies like On the Waterfront, and seeing these films, Lawrence of Arabia, I saw when I was 12 years old. It's like that's where I wanted to go. So in some respects, I was a snob in the 70s, like every other film school graduate
Right.
was television. I'm going to go be in the movie business.
Right.
And my feeling is that movies and film is a great art form, but it's a cruel business.
Yeah.
And no matter how great your movie is, if it doesn't do well at the box office or it gets bad reviews, you're one notch closer to being in director jail.
Right.
And then television becomes an alternative to the world of telling stories, forget the big screen, and making a living, because let me tell you, it's feast or famine in the feature film world.
Yeah.
You
Even more so now than ever.
Oh, forget it now. Now now, if you want to talk about now, that's a real area I don't understand. But what I do know from going through that in my years was that when my feature film career, after several flops, and I think Dr. Detroit was a flop, even though it became a bit of a cult hit, and the Richard Pryor movie was a moderate hit dash disappointment to the Richard
But that was sort of taken away from you, right? I mean, that movie was sort of compromised.
it was compromised from the beginning because there was always a drama around, are we making a comedy or are we making a drama?
You're
And
like, yes.
yeah, made both. Anyway, the bottom line was it got well reviewed, but it was really a mess in the post-production aspect of it. And Dr. Detroit was a mess from the beginning because there was no script. So so it was a rough period. And then I found that, as someone said, if you do good work, you'll work in television. And television became my friend. So I was doing television movies and had a great time. And then I remember this moment where I realized, wait a minute, TV movies, even though they're telling stories, they're fillers for commercials.
Yeah.
Everyone's talking about the TV series. This is now the late 80s, early 90s. It's like I could go to a dinner party and someone would say, what have you done? And I'd mention 5 television movies, and they go, well, we never heard of it. And there's another director next to me. He goes, well, I direct 30 something. And they go, 30 something? That's my favorite show.
Yeah.
Did you do the episode? Da, 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 da. And I realized, wait a minute, I'm in the wrong part of this business. Hence, I got involved in TV series.
So many threads here I want to pick up. Where to start? So
I'm
I'll
going
go
to
back.
throw one last thing in.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
irony of ironies is that today, both from film school as well as young directors, everybody wants to do television episodes.
Well, that's the prestige now in the area where I think people feel like they have the closest opportunity to be an auteur compared to the studios where there's so much money on the line, everything's committee.
Yeah. Well, but there's a lot of stakes even with the miniseries, but what it really is, well, it's so hard to get anything done. If you can direct 2 episodes a year, you can make a living,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
good living. You
Yeah.
know?
It's it, so then I'll go this thread where so many people who worked in the sort of, and you made the one film independently, picked up by Corman later, but so many people from that sort of independent cinema, especially the horror exploitation kind of cinema, which was not necessarily what you made, but were hired by the networks to do made for TV movies because they're essentially low budget independent films. And they know you can get it done under budget in the time, and a lot of times the subject matter is the same as some of the exploitation movies because they're
What it was it was the B movie of the studio system. It
Yeah.
was 18 days, 20 days, 2.3 million or 2.5 or 2.7, and I got to direct, a gangster movie, a family drama, a cop on the run movie, as and then there was what's the word I'm looking for? A sophisticated elite area where political social dramas were being done. And then I got a chance to do 2 or 3 of those. One was about the building of the Vietnam Memorial called To Heal a Nation that starred Eric Roberts. And then I did a really wonderfully complex TV movie about the plane that got shot down over Russian airspace, and it starred Angela Lansbury, and that was a wonderful script and a terrific television movie. So I started doing the political high-end dramas, and directed some terrific people.
Yeah, that was I was going to make the point too that especially at that time, to almost from when your dad was there, it was LA was movies and New York was TV, but it sort of morphed into you're a TV actor or a movie actor. And if you're on one or the other, it's because you're on the way up or the way down. So these made for TV movies would be a really interesting mix of older film actors who now were sort of not box office names, but were amazing names from the previous generation of Hollywood.
I had George Papard, in
Yeah.
the movie,
And people like that with up and coming people. So it was this sort of nexus of really interesting mixtures of people you got to work with on those.
Correct. I mean, I had Tim Matheson, who was still on the way up, and I'm trying to think of who else. But then Donald Sutherland, I did a terrific television movie with him, but he was great, and it was a terrific TV movie. But he was very honest and said, "Oh my God, I'm here for the money.
Of course.
12 days, X amount of dollars. How can I turn this down?" So it was fun. It was financing actors,
Yeah. Yeah. Who are less ego driven or a little more jobbing actors who are like, it's a gig, which might get a lot of British actors who would do those.
Definitely. So, but it dried up. It dried up, interestingly.
It was almost a victim of its own success, I think, because I think, to your point, sort of the prestige made-for-TV movies started being done by, like, HBO. That was kind of their first. They won all kinds of Cable Ace Awards. They did, like, And the Band Played On. And, they started doing these prestige movies for HBO. Then it started to sort of go into niches, where now, like, USA Network was doing a ton of them, but they were doing weirdly, like, erotic thrillers with no nudity or sex in them.
Right,
And
I did one that had an erotic thriller with no sex.
Yes.
Secret Passions. Yeah, with Susan Lucci. I mean,
Okay, yes.
Yeah, there I was. But and yes, you're absolutely right. And I think they hurt themselves that way by not. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like a content. I think it was just a thirst for content in the late 80s, early 90s, and then dreaded because you still had a lot of theatrical presentations. You could sell made for TV movies to theaters in Europe and in Japan.
Right.
You had all the cable channels, basic UHF networks, like they just needed content. And then I think it dried up all at once.
Correct. We're seeing today some very, very big changes as well. And it's so complicated because network appointment television is almost over because they've come up with the DVRs and the streaming and the Peacock and CBS and Paramount, and all these different streaming places where you can watch the show later. And then they've got something called I don't know what the DVR, how to gauge ratings. If it's,
the plus 12, I think it's called. It's like 12 days. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And that's NBC and ABC on demand. I mean, the whole thing is like, it's no longer you have to run to the TV set to catch the show at 9:00. That's changed. The viewership is down because the competition with the miniseries, not only Netflix, but it's Hulu, it's Amazon, it's Apple TV, it's et cetera, and big, humongous budgets, and shooting around the world, and it's international, which is why the strike was so complicated, because you really think we're on the winning side here? They could finally at some point go, guess what? We don't need the Writers Guild. We'll just hire writers in Italy and France and England and Australia, and there you have it. I mean, and Japan, where you've got Squid Game as the number one,
I think that was one of the turning points in the negotiations, was when whatever the European Union Writers Union was like, we're not going to work for you either. We're not going to cross that picket line. So they were like, well, that was our plan B. Now we got nothing.
Well, that, you know what? I wasn't clear about that one, but that's a very, very big point. However, as the future goes, the hunger for European content, I mean, I can list it for you. We love The Crown, love Slow Horses, loved Call My Agent, loved My Brilliant Friend, Italian, loved Lupin, French, loved Queen's Gambit, England. I'm up to six. Um, I'm just pulling them off the top of my hat, so I'm sure there's another five I'm forgetting. Squid Game,
Yep.
seven.
And
Um,
people are now willing to watch foreign movies in foreign languages for TV shows with subtitles, where that's one of the other threads I wanted to pick up on was, you're sort of the first generation of kids who grew up with TV who get into the entertainment industry, but also the exact time that you're like that perfect late teens, early 20s, that's like the art house sweet spot of French New Wave and revivalist film noir movies and foreign films and
Godard,
Kurosawa and yeah.
absolutely everything. We're watching it all, eating it up, and it was. And then, of course, the big joke. I remember this with the Roger Corman group is he picked up Cries and Whispers from Ingmar Bergman and made it a hit. And Bergman loved Roger Corman because it
Yeah.
was like, why are you taking my? And he only changed one thing. Did you ever hear this story?
No.
Okay, because the film in Sweden was called Whispers and Cries. He changed it to Cries and Whispers. And it's like, great, I'm fine with that. Go, I mean, please. So that's crazy. It's crazy, and then I don't know why, but that genre dried up in terms of the art house. They all started to shut down. I mean, I don't know what that was.
Well, I
Why?
think part of it was obviously video, which killed so many things.
Yeah.
But most of the foreign films were, for the most part, sort of independent for the most part, because Italy didn't get a film industry again until the late 50s. And at that point, some of the only movies people had seen there was like Snow White because of the fascism. And, there was a studio system in China with Golden Harvest and Shaw Brothers. So that was more like Hollywood. But everywhere else, it was sort of an independent sort of fly by night,
Right.
seat of your pants thing.
Because the late 50s, early 60s, when I was a teenager in New York, we were watching, the British cinema and Loneliness was a Long Distance Runner and Tony Richardson movies and Taste of Honey and Saturday Night and Sun, all those films. And then they were winning Oscars, Lawrence of
Yeah.
Arabia, Tom Jones, etc. So
Or
it
even
was
like the Lady Killers and all the Ealing comedies and all the stuff. Like, yeah.
it was a explosive time, European cinema for the movies, and we were all eating it up. But you're right. I think video, VHSs, DVDs, you could start seeing them at home, and it kind of killed the theater marketplace. I, I don't know. I have a theory or an idea, and I can say it here because I don't think anybody's going to do it. But I think the way the independent cinema returns is, and they're kind of doing it. Netflix has bought theaters, which is they're promoting the films in theaters, regardless of the box office. It doesn't
Hmm.
matter. It's part of the whole concept. You take Maestro, you put Maestro in 10 theaters or 20 theaters for a month. It doesn't matter what it does because it's going to, and they advertise it like crazy, and they're waiting for its debut on Netflix, which will hopefully be a big winner for Netflix. The part that's complicated is when is when is this going to turn on itself financially? I've always said, Apple, no concern, Amazon, no concern. The only thing that could happen at Amazon is that one day there'll be a big meeting, and the head of Amazon is Bezos still the head of Amazon? No,
I think so on paper. Yeah. But I'm, yeah.
who cares, right? So Joe, the head of Amazon, turns to the head of the arts department and says, "How did we do this year? Not good, Joe. Well, what happened?" He said, "Well, we lost. What did we lose? 2 billion." And he goes, 2 billion for okay. How did we do over selling toilet paper over here? We made 5 billion in the. And he goes, "You know what? Get rid of the entertainment area. Let's just scratch it. It's really not worth it anymore. We're not getting
Right.
anything from it. It's all a little bit of vanity right now. It's really like Amazon wants to be in the movie business, Apple wants to be in the movie business, Netflix is the movie business. So I don't know and HBO, those are question marks. I don't
Yeah,
know how they live, you know?
it's I think too for the art house and all those things, I think they're a little bit of victims of their own success, because I think one of the reasons that you were easy that you saw so many of them, or like when we were growing up on TV, you got to get an education in foreign and old films and wars because they were cheap. So because they were so cheap, we got to see them. But once they get popular, people start to like them. They're not cheap anymore. And I think the sort of shift with where the theatrical release of a movie became part of the promotional tour for the home video or the streaming, that I think is not sustainable. But the thing that I've noticed, and COVID put a little bit of a dent in this, is I love midnight movies and, revival, those sort of shared experience all in one room thing. And by the mid 2000s, that was gone. No one was doing it. It was, we'll get the Blu-ray, we'll get the DVD, we'll sit around our house, do it.
Right.
But then about 10 years after that, and the generation younger than me came back big time.
Yeah.
So I think that it's
Of
experiences.
Ninja Turtles midnight screenings and introduced it in France, and that it's happening all around the world.
And I think that's where you're at, where people, to where where we started with this, where, 20 million people watching the same thing all at once, that shared experience. And the thing I always talk about on the show with the sort of pre-millennium, those of us who grew up with TV, we have that connection with people we don't know because we have that shared experience. That was lacking, and people are really going out of their way to get that again and have like a live connection.
Yes. Something else happened. We're really covering a lot of ground, but I was going to say the other thing that happened was, but the video store dried up. I mean, that happened like within the last 3 years, right? 5 years?
Yeah.
I mean, there's still a couple left. There's one in Belfast, Maine, that I
Yes,
know.
of course there is.
But it's died because you can get anything you want on Amazon Prime or and streaming. Now, at the same time, I don't have this. This is anecdotal. I don't have exact numbers, but I've heard that the streaming of like Peacock and they're losing billions. I don't understand what's going on. Is it a saturated marketplace now? Is there too much product, or is it?
So what I've heard is that, number one, these are all basically Moneyball venture capitalist guys that are running these things. So even at the height of the studio system, the money guys, they liked movies.
Yes.
They might not be creative in any way, but they were like kind of had a love for movies to some degree at least. These are literally like spreadsheet numbers guys. And so part of this was, we're going to start this studio, the streaming studio as a loss leader. We're going to lose money for a couple of years. It's sort of the Walmart model, right? We'll undercut and lose money till we're the last one standing. Then we jack everything up and it's just us. But the problem is you have 20 things doing that and, no one's going to win. The thing that for a while I was pitching shows and was kind of confused because this was when there's a South Park episode about Netflix where the joke is when they call Netflix, the head of Netflix answers and goes, "Hello, you're greenlit. How can I help you? This is Netflix." Because they wanted everything, right? And I was like, how does that translate? Like, what's a hit on Netflix? And it was pointed out to me that the reason their shows only last 3 seasons tops with the few legacy shows is that if every single person who subscribed to that thing watches it, that's a failure. Because they want a show that's going to get new people to sign up, forget they signed up and pay every month. If they're not growing with new shows, they're failing. So it's crazy. If you have 20 million people signed up and every single one of them watched your show, that's a failed show in their view.
That's very complicated. I don't know how you win.
Yeah, I don't think you can, but I don't know I think the short-sightedness of that kind of investment doesn't allow them to see that you can't.
Right. I heard an interview a while ago, must have been about a month, with Barry Diller, who says that the biggest mistake networks are making is what they have, which is actually a novelty right now, is appointment television. That in essence, You publicize something big enough and go, you want to see it? You actually have to watch it Friday night at 7 p.m. or 9 p.m. This is where the whole saturated market and the confusion, because Barry Diller is making an interesting point. If all of a sudden it was like, guess what? You really heard the show was great, you really loved it, you have to watch it. You can't record it, you can't get it later, and you'll miss it.
Which is why if you look at top 10 show ratings now, that like 9 out of 10 of them are sporting events.
Yeah.
Because those are the only thing people want to watch day and date, because a week later it's not relevant anymore. And the studios, the networks, I think, have been trying to bend over backwards to crack another sports that's not sports, which is why we get the live, Broadway musicals or the events like that. And I don't think any of them have kind of caught on. I think if they're able to crack that, yeah, then they're using that advantage they have.
The problem is, what's the value of it being live? Is a gimmick.
Right.
My father was from live TV, and when he heard like they were doing a live something, he said, God, it was a nightmare. You're going
Right.
live. We can do it much better if we tape it and do a second take.
We had to do it live.
Yeah. So now you want to do it live as a way to bring an audience in. Well, you'll never do it as well as if you had more time and opportunity. But it's the way they promote the idea that you can only watch it when it airs.
Or something might go wrong. It's the spectacle.
I don't know. The whole thing is really up in the air, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
It's. I have no. I mean, if I did know, I'd be
Yeah.
very wealthy right now. But it's funny where in some ways, like to your point, yeah, we can watch anything we ever wanted to watch at any time from just about anywhere. But at the same time, I feel like a lot less is coming out, or like I know about so much less, or I'm not discovering new things as much, or I'm not as, I used to get, Entertainment Weekly or TV Guide, and I'd sit there with my calendar and I'd write when movies are coming out, and I'd go, for like months in advance.
You bet. And we can really get to the heart of this hour and talk about TV Guide for a minute, because I loved TV Guide. I mean, it would tell me what's coming, what's on. I'd read the stories.
Yep.
I have several TV guides because I think Picket Fences was a big TV guide show.
They loved it.
Yeah, Chicago Hope, they loved. And they would be little captions and stories and who directed it on the TV Guide. I mean, I don't know. I don't know who was TV Guide.
So it was a Philadelphia company originally. It was the sort of story of how they became TV Guide is pretty interesting, and I've sort of learned since doing this show. But there were independent sort of TV listing magazines in every single market. Slowly, TV Guide bought them all, put them under one banner based out of Philadelphia. So pre-1952, any TV guides you see, they call pre-national. Some of them are called TV Guides, some of them are TV whatever. But then they all came under TV Guide, who for 40, 50 years was the number one magazine in the world, the largest print run of any magazine in the world. So part of that was they would write really interesting, good, honest articles and reviews because they didn't answer to the studios, because they're like, we're TV Guide. We don't need you.
Now, I have to ask you a couple of questions. Is anyone still in existence from TV Guide? Have they contacted you? Have you contacted them?
A little bit. So it's weird. It's sort of in the early 2000s, it's split into three companies. It's split into TV Guide magazine, which is technically still around, but it's like a tabloid size, and it's just press release. I don't know what it's for. There's no writing. There's listings, but who needs that? There's tvguide.com. And then there's TV Guide Channel, which is now part of Paramount. It turned into Freevee.
Same people running it that
Yes.
ran TV Guide? Yeah.
Yep, same people. So Freevee is kind of the closest thing to the old TV Guide, because they have tons of old shows. They curate stuff. It's like a little bit more thought out.
Are they interested in your podcast, TV Guide?
we were pitching this as a show on Freevee or whatever it was called. I think it was called Pop for a while, because they were like, "This is a great idea because we can, we'll do like this day in TV or whatever, or we'll talk about this show when we're launching. We're going to show Starsky and Hutch now, or what. It would kind of work." And then it was that this was for like a year and a half. A friend of mine and I were working on this, and then it was that classic case of new guy, new CEO, everything the old guy was working on is garbage, get it out of here kind of thing.
Right.
So it's but at the same time I'm able to do this from home with my own gear and be on the sort of digital shelf next to like $1 million shows and get to the same people, which would be insane to think of before.
That's great because keep going. I know you've been doing this for 14 years, you said?
10 years, yeah, since 2014.
Now, another question. Do you have every TV guide?
Pretty much. If you don't account for all the regional variation, yeah. Because there's 60 versions of every issue.
Well, right, but you have New York and LA, or is that the
mostly Boston. So like 70s, 80s, 90s are Boston because they're either mine or I got them from around here. I have mostly New York pre-1970s, especially now. A guy who used to write for Letterman passed away recently, and his family sent me all. He had every TV guide from like 1947 until he died.
Because I, from a historical standpoint, would love to see if I could find any of my father's shows advertised in TV Guide.
Oh yeah, I'll pull my late 40s ones. If you shoot me an email with some of the titles,
I will. And there's one that when he broke the blacklist, he did a series. You could write this down, and 1964, called SO Repertory Theater.
Okay, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, and it's not in IMDb at all, but I do remember it being in TV Guide. It was a one act plays with theater companies, and then he did a thing called Festival of the Performing Arts in 63 or 62, which was with Zero Mostel and Jason Robards, and they were out, and Hirschfeld did the drawings, and I'm sure they were in TV Guide.
I 100% have seen that in TV Guide because I have 60s New York editions, and that I'm almost positive to the point where I think when I had John Sayles on, we might have even talked about that. Let me look. I know I have to have that. And it's funny, one thing I've discovered too is since I have all these sort of primary source materials, is how wrong IMDb is for TV stuff. Like there are shows, because I was tape trading for years pre-internet with rare shows or movies, or so there are shows that are like only one episode ever exists, and I'm like, I have 13. I have 13 right here, or on tape, and they're all listed and they're real shows,
Right. I mean, because the very first show that my father did that broke the blacklist was the Zero Mostel 1 hour Festival of Performing Arts. Because Zero Mostel was blacklisted, and well, and he wanted my father, so it was like quite a moment.
Do you remember, because you were what, 12, 13, 14, when that sort of broke? Do you remember that being like a huge deal, or was it kind of, did you talk about that?
Oh, yeah, no. I mean, it was like crying and tears when his name appeared on television for the first time in 12 years, and people calling and, and all of a sudden seeing he's not dead and gone.
What did he think about the stuff you directed? Did he give you feedback or notes and stuff?
My father was a very, very supportive person, and they loved Picket Fences. They loved it. And, he was very, in fact, it was an interesting, complicated situation because when the blacklist broke and he was working, it had beaten him down a little. So his feeling was, I'm 60, I'll get these shows, I'll do the soap opera. You do it. You do it. So he was very supportive, but at the same time, it was a complicated burden of feeling like I've got to resurrect my father's career, which is he was my hero, so I was wanting to get him to be recognized. Whereas, in fact, I had to deal with my own nonsense.
Right.
The complicated life of a career in our profession. I mean, God Almighty. I mean, how many people survive it? Forget,
or work more than a decade. Like
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
that crazy thing that, and I,
You're fighting a war, and how many people come out of it still standing? And I have an article about me on the Bad News Bears sequel. It was like in the LA Times. I was 26, and at that moment, I was the youngest director working in Hollywood. That was what the article was about. Now I'm 73, and I'm going to do a couple of episodes.
like your father, he directed Grace Kelly in the play and then got to do the film version. You did that as well with, is it to
He
Jillian?
did not do the film version, actually. He was blacklisted at that point.
Oh, okay.
So I think it was Ruben Mamoulian or someone of that stature who did it.
But Grace Kelly was in the film version for
Right,
the
right.
thing.
And they
But
remained close. But I got to do the movie version of To Jillian on her
yes,
30th birthday, having directed the play in Los Angeles. But that was a 10-year journey
ooh, wow,
because the play had gotten optioned by the studio, and they had another director and another writer. And after 10 years of unsuccessfully developing it, it's an article I wrote, and I don't know how you can get it. It's in the Directors Guild magazine, but the short version was Jeff Sagansky, who bought Jillian because he loved the production that I had directed the play of for Sony, TriStar, was now running CBS, and there I am doing Picket Fences, and I go to him and say, "What? Oh, I know what happens. Second year or third year of Picket Fences, he leaves CBS and goes back to Sony."
right.
And I call him and say, "What about Jillian?" And he calls me back like an hour later. He goes, "It's available. Can you do it for $6 million?" And I went, "Yes."
Yep.
And then I showed it to David Kelly, and he said, I said, "Would you write a screenplay?" And he wrote it, and it all happened like after 10 years, it combusted
In
in
like
like
a
3
week.
yeah.
That's
I got
amazing.
a playwright and said, "We're shooting in August in Nantucket." And then I think I called him in June, and he called me back and said, "You don't mean this August, you mean a year from August." I said, "No, this August. This is on the fast track." So
Amazing.
pretty amazing. Anyway, this has been a pleasure.
Oh, baby, I see you in my TV set, yeah, baby, I see you in my TV set. I cut your head off and put it in my...
There you go. That's Michael. You can go to michael-pressman.com. That's his website. If you want to talk to him directly, if you find any of those episodes, Festival of the Performing Arts, SO Repertory Theater, Cosmopolitan Theater, sort of early 60s, or just send them to me, tvguidancecounselor@gmail.com. Next week, we have a brand new episode, so I hope to see you then for that brand new episode of TV Guidance Counselor.
An erotic thriller with no sex.